Katie, it'll hear you. You don't have to go that close. Yeah. Test it now and block the audience. You can talk louder than that. Hi, Tayama. Say testing, testing.
Hear me? She was going to.
I don't know. Maybe they can't hear us.
Talk into it.
Court details.
That's not
sentence.
Whoa. Oh, that's gonna be.
Yeah.
Crowd size.
We also whispered.
Crowd size.
Can you hear it now?
She pointed out. Pointed
It's all new technology.
It's good. It's entertaining.
Testing. Can anyone that's watching online just let us know if you can hear us? Okay.
You still have like 4 minutes anyways, so.
You just don't want to be live and panic.
Chris. You can probably share your screen too if you don't want like a double backup. That's actually fine because I keep forgetting Zoom's recording it and everything.
Well, we can assist that. So anyway. So if we can.
Our tenant's queen over here.
That's true. That's day I became.
Let's hear it. Just on time. I mean, that's different. You can put a chair, you can pull a chair and sit right beside me if you want. Great. Give it a couple minutes. I kind of want to reward the people that are on today. So I may just go for it.
You got 30 people online.
Yeah. So that will
Just make sure when you're talking, talk close to her if you want to do your own intro. I should have just given you a mic. I should have just given you a mic. I can just give you a mic also.
Do you know how to do the dual thing that he showed us?
Yeah, you don't need it. Well, you're just doing a quick intro anyways. Yeah.
I guess like.
Yeah, exactly. Look like friends.
Are we unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Can you guys hear me online?
So I'll catch.
Hear me specifically? Say yes if you can.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so we're gonna get started early. I usually give it a couple minutes, but I'm gonna reward our people that are here on time because we're back to school and we're studious students and realtors. But I'm really excited because we just started our back to school series for you. We started with our power hour on Monday. And today we're going to start off with a really cool session on listing and selling tenanted properties. So we brought in our paralegal Vida here from Stonegate Legal. And she's going to be answering the legal questions that you guys always ask us, but it's kind of nice to have an actual paralegal here to answer those. And just so that you guys know, we do over 200 leases a month. So we get a lot of tenant questions, and that's just from the tenant landlord side. That doesn't include the questions we get when people want to list a property that has a tenant in it and they're like, how do I kick them out? Or if you're trying to purchase a property, there's lots of tenanted properties right now, especially in the condo world, that are currently tenanted, and there's always so many questions about vacant possession, and there's a lot of laws and legal stuff to it. You can't just kick tenants out how you guys think you can. So we're gonna leave it with Vida. She's gonna explain all these great questions, probably our most common questions. I saw the list of what she's gonna be talking about, and these are probably our most common questions that we get. Typically Nelson answers a lot of these questions as well. So I think it's gonna be a really great session. We will record this online. We'll put it on our YouTube channel afterwards, so you guys can rewatch it anytime. Yeah, pay attention so there's no questions. And we'll save our in-person and online questions for after the session. But if you guys are online and you think of a question, just stick it in the chat and then we'll save it for afterwards. Same with you guys. We even had Jesse wrote out his question here. So if you guys want to write it down for yourself and then just put your hand up. If you're shy, you can bring it up.
Good job,
Jesse. But yeah, I'm really excited for the session. So I will let you take over. I'll do our little screen, or do you prefer to do a intro before I get to the screen? Okay. Let's get right into it, guys. Perfect. And I think you guys can all see that. Do you want me to, I'll turn the lights out a little bit. Is it clear? Okay.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come and learn about best legal practices in owning and operating rental property. My name is Bita Di Lisi. If you already haven't done so, head over to our social media, like us, follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We always tend to provide updates with what's happening in the realm of tenants. Today, we're going to be talking about listing and selling a tenanted property. So you will get a lot of information from this session. You may not want to touch tenants and leases anymore, or you may touch them with caution moving forward. If you ever come across a matter where you require some clarity, perhaps you have a question, you're uncertain about something, we are here to provide you with support. So we provide realtors and landlords and their investor clients with legal support. So the best method of communication with myself directly is via email, info@stonegate-legal-services.ca. If you do call our office, likely you won't get me. You may get a hold of one of our paralegals, all of whom will be happy to assist you. Now, if you have a smartphone, which everyone does nowadays, you can scan that QR code located at the bottom left of your screen to add us in as an automatic contact to your contact list. And I believe I've already sent Katelyn the PDF slides. Feel free to send it to everyone and use it as a resource moving forward. So let's get started, everyone. For the purpose of this presentation, everything we discuss is for information only. Nothing is to be taken as legal advice. Please don't go back and say, I attended a session with Vida at my brokerage and she told me that these are the steps that we need to do. No, it's for information only. If you can kindly, again, hold all your questions to the very end, I promise you, I will open up the floor for a Q&A and you can ask me anything that's landlord and tenant related. So I'll tell you a bit about us, Stonegate Legal Services. My career actually started in real estate. This is going back, I'm going to age myself, in and around 2004, 2005, where I obtained my real estate license. And through that path, I was acquiring landlord and investor clients who purchased small to medium-sized apartment buildings and commercial plazas, but they weren't in the country or they weren't in the province to deal with the day-to-day operations. So what did I do? Just like all my real estate counterparts, I offered to manage their properties so that I can keep that relationship going with that client. And eventually, one day, if they needed to buy or sell more properties, guess what they would use? And through that path, I would likely end up at the landlord and tenant board on matters related to non-payment of rent, late payment of rent, maintenance, illegal activities, so forth and so on. And 9 times out of 10, my matters would get dismissed because I was not a licensed paralegal or a lawyer. So I went back to school. I obtained my paralegal license, again, to add an extra service for my clients, and I was years of schooling. And I was being approached by broker of records, managers, the Toronto Real Estate Board, asking to put on training sessions for agents, not only because of our real estate background, but because nobody else is reaching out to the agents. And you guys are all I call you guys the frontline workers of the real estate industry because you've already built that relationship with your clients. So likely your client is gonna call you and say, hey, Katelyn, my tenant hasn't paid rent, what do I do? Right, so you guys are the front line. So I'll tell you a little bit about our team. Now, as of 2018, we opened our doors to the public. At Stonegate Legal Services, we provide legal support to realtors like yourselves, your landlord and investor clients throughout the province of Ontario. In the areas mainly of non-payment of rent, late payment of rent, cash for keys, owners wanting to occupy their tenanted properties, or new purchasers purchasing tenanted properties and they perhaps want to occupy their properties. We have a team of 7 paralegals, all of whom are fully qualified and they're equipped with the knowledge and expertise to answer your questions and handle your matters. So let's dive into some preliminary slides. As I mentioned, we provide legal support to realtors, so we receive an overwhelming number of calls at least daily. And here are the top 3 questions we get asked, at least daily. So agents will call me and they'll say, hey, Vida, can we evict the tenant to sell a property? Or the tenant isn't allowing for showings, can we just kick them out? Or the landlord's lease is coming to an end, can we give the tenant notice to move out? So who's heard of these questions before, or who's ever wondered about these questions before? Of course. And I'll tell you guys, the hard answer to all these 3 questions is a hard no. No, you can't evict a tenant to sell a property. No, you can't kick them out because they're interfering and not allowing for showings. And no, you can't just kick them out because their lease is coming to an end. And the reason you can't do all of that is because tenants have security of tenure. It's the law. It's in the Residential Tenancies Act. And what that means is that they are entitled, keyword, they are entitled to continue their tenancy after that initial lease term comes to an end. It's not up to the landlord whether or not the landlord wants to continue and provide them housing. Not up to the landlord. It's up to the tenant as to whether or not they want to continue their tenancy. You see, a tenancy can be terminated. And there are 3 ways that a tenancy can be terminated. Number 1, if the tenant decides to leave and gives notice. Number 2, by mutual agreement, kind of like a mutual release. And number 3, by way of a court or a board order. So if the tenant doesn't give their notice, and if they don't agree to end the tenancy, a landlord must have cause. They must have a reason to pursue a termination of tenancy. And in doing so, they have to serve the appropriate notice, fulfill requirements, file with the landlord and tenant board, wait 6 to 8 months for a notice of hearing, do a Hail Mary, and hopefully the matter gets heard at the landlord and tenant board, and let the board decide whether that tenancy should come to an end. Because remember, landlords and agents, just because a property is sold, just because a tenant owes $70,000 does not mean the board will end the tenancy. Anything flies at the landlord and tenant board. Okay, so let the hairs on your arms stand up. Okay, let's talk about vacant possession. Okay, guys, honest show of hands. Who has read the agreement of purchase and sale? Who has glimpsed over the agreement of purchase and sale? All right, great question. So if you've never read the agreement of purchase and sale, it's fine. What you need to know is that, number 1, it's an editable document. We all know that. You go there, you fill in the blanks, you submit it, hopefully the other side accepts it as it is, it's fine. Oftentimes, before the offer is submitted on a tenanted property, agents call me and they say, hey, Vida, can you send me a vacant possession clause? And I love my agents. Have you read the agreement of purchase and sale? Oh yeah, I've read every single word for word. Then you know that there's a vacant possession clause innately built in, right? Oh yeah, I must have missed it. Right, so the last sentence on the first page of the agreement of purchase and sale, the closing date clause. Here, upon completion, vacant possession of the property shall be given to the buyer unless otherwise provided for this agreement. So buyer agents, depending on which side of the table you're on, this can work for you or this can work against you. Buyer agents, you always need to make the intention of your buyers very clear and scheduled. Is the buyer going to be moving in? Is the buyer going to assume the tenant? Is the buyer going to require vacant possession because they want to do renovations or re-rent it? What's the deal? What does the buyer want? If this is left untouched and the listing agent gets their client to accept it, congratulations, listing agent, you have now guaranteed vacant possession. Which is very scary, I'll tell you. Agents call me and they'll say, I missed this. I should have called you before, but I missed this. Now I have to incur legal fees. More than likely, I'm paying for the cash for keys. And now I have to pay out of my pocket. It's almost like I worked free. Buyer agents, if this is left untouched and the listing agent accepts it, you just sit back, you do your buyer's final visit a few days before closing. Hopefully the tenant has left. If they haven't, you extend closing, you ask for a penalty, you know the drill. So really, you need to pay attention to this. Remember, your clients are hiring you because you guys are the pros. You should have glimpsed over the agreement of purchase and sale, at least the important clauses, which we're going to talk about today. But let's say, in a perfect world, you listed a tenanted property, they allowed for showings, they didn't give you a hard time about photos, you had your open house, no issues. What happens when a property is sold? Because on a owner-occupied property, we know that when you have a firm sale, time is of the essence. And on a tenanted property, it's almost double time is of the essence, because now you have this third party, this tenant that you have to get out. And it's around this time where the agents call our office to ask for help or advice, or their clients call in. And here are the options available. Anytime you're listing and selling a tenanted property, here are the options available. Number one, an N12 can be served. Who's heard of the N12 notice? Everybody has, okay. Or the buyer is going to assume the tenancy. How do we find out which direction we're going? Remember, I said in Schedule A, buyer agents, you need to make the intentions of your clients, of your buyers, very clear. What is the buyer going to do? Is the buyer going to move in? Is their family member going to move in? Or are they going to assume the tenant? And option number two, cash for keys. Everybody's heard of cash for keys, right? We're going to talk about that as well. But let's break it down, because even though I'm going to say, guys, as agents, please do not get involved with drafting, with serving, with even downloading a blank N12 and clients and saying, here's the N12, this is what you need to do. Do not get involved with the legal process. Let's talk about the N12 first. This is what the N12 looks like. Everybody's seen this more or less, right? So the N12 is a 60-day notice to terminate the tenancy because the landlord or the new purchaser require possession of the property. Depending on who requires possession, the requirements shift a little. And I'm going to go back, guys, as agents, there are many reasons why I say don't get involved with this legal process. Here are the reasons why. Number one, you're not licensed by the Law Society of Ontario. You hold a professional real estate license. Number two, who has read their errors and omissions insurance? I know everybody's telling the truth because nobody ever reads that. But here's what you need to do. Here's the takeaway. The takeaway is, if you deal with landlord and tenant related matters by providing a legal service, Your errors and omissions insurance doesn't cover you. So what does that mean? That means if you get fined, you're going to have to dig into your pocket and pay that fine. Whether it's to the landlord and tenant board, whether it's to RICO, whether it's to the tenant, whether it's even to your landlord. And I've seen agents be fined anywhere from $7,500 to $14,000. Nobody wants to. Number 3, you're not familiar with the requirements or consequences of these notices. Now, after this session, you will be familiar. You may not want to touch it, but you're definitely going to be familiar. Number 4, you're opening up yourselves to personal liability. And number 5, you're opening up the brokerage to liability. And I don't make very many guarantees. I don't, but I can guarantee you, your broker of record doesn't want any claims with your names on it ending up on his desk. He's far too busy to deal with these claims. So don't touch it. But, there's always a but, I want you to be aware of the notice. So I said that it can be used for the landlord or new purchaser's own use. Let's talk about the landlord's own use. If the landlord requires possession of the property for themselves or their immediate family member, child, parent, or caregiver. That's it. No niece, nephew, no grandchild, no grandparents. That's it. For at least 1 year, they must occupy the property. No if, and, or buts, period. They must property. Now, I have some agents who call me and they'll say, well, we really need to sell it. He's willing to leave the property vacant. So what can we do? I have some ideas. So I say, guys, tell me your ideas. What if we make it look like somebody's living? What if we stage the property? What if we install timers to make it look like the living room light comes on around 5 o'clock, kitchen light comes on at about 7 o'clock, bedroom lights come on at 10, they turn off at 10:30. You know, what if we make it look like they're living there? Well, we'll have the neighbor, who's a really good friend of mine, park on the driveway to make it look like there are tire tracks if there's a snowfall. Guys, while these are very good suggestions, tenants are very, very savvy. They are much savvier nowadays than they were 15, 20 years ago. I have tenants that we go to the landlord and tenant board to defend their landlords on. They go right up to the front door, broad daylight, doesn't matter if the Ring camera is looking right at them. They peek into the window pane and they snap photos. Whoa. They don't care, camera or no camera. And they do that for 10 months and they are able to establish a pattern that the property is staged, then nobody is living there. And they sue. So I'll tell you, tenants are a lot more savvy than a lot of landlords are. Now, remember, the requirements change. For a new purchaser, an N12 needs to be served if there's a firm agreement of purchase and sale, and if the new purchaser, their child, parent, or caregiver require possession for at least 1 year. Now, for the landlord's own use, I put require possession for at least 1 year. I put the same for the new purchaser. However, if you look at the N12, it's a little reason 1 is landlord's own use, and it says the following person intends to move into the rental unit and occupy for at least 1 year. However, reason 2 for the purchaser's unit, it says I have signed an agreement of purchase and sale of the rental unit, and the following person intends to move into the rental unit. But it doesn't say for how long the new purchaser must occupy. So Vida, why are you saying purchaser should occupy for at least 1 year? In fact, nowhere in the Residential Tenancies Act does it say how long a new purchaser must occupy. So Vida, why are you saying purchaser occupy for 1 year? Because there is case law to persuade the board that 6 months is not reasonable for the purchaser to occupy. 8 months is not reasonable for a purchaser to occupy. 10 months, not reasonable. So what's good for the goose must be good for the gander. And I always say, make sure if you're purchasing a tenanted property that you tell your buyer, you must be prepared to occupy for at least 1 year. Because I'll tell you, if you don't, the tenant has recourse. We'll talk about the recourse. Now, remember, I said the requirements change for the purchaser. Here are the requirements of the agreement of purchase and sale must be firm. Unconditional. There cannot be a clause that even says this offer is conditional upon the tenant moving out. Failing which, this offer becomes null and void. That condition even so cannot be in the agreement of purchase and sale, because that makes an offer conditional. And as we all know, conditions are what? They're exit clauses. And if it goes in front of the landlord and tenant board, which 99.9% of the time, these matters end up decided at the board, it's gonna get tossed. Another requirement is that the property must contain 3 units or less for the new purchaser to occupy. So in your agreement of purchase and sale, there must be direction from the buyer to the seller to serve the N12. However, even with that direction, you need to meet the requirements. If the buyer's instructing the seller to serve the N12, the number of units must be 3 units or less. Or it can serve an N12 for the landlord's own use if there are 4 or more units. Remember, requirements change a little bit. There's another reason why I say, guys, don't touch this stuff. You don't know the requirements. Okay? But let's talk about other requirements, because there are 3 very important requirements to the N12 notice. So number 1, good faith. Number 2, compensation. And number 3, a declaration must be provided. Let's break this down. Number 1, good faith. Good faith is having the genuine intent to occupy the property for personal use. Okay, N12 cannot be used as a loophole to get the tenant out because you don't like the tenant. Nobody cares about your feelings. Sorry to say. The law has no heartstrings. I don't like the tenant. The tenant is not responding to my WhatsApp. They're not responding to my Facebook messages. They're not responding to WeChat. They're not, they don't answer my phone calls. They don't come to the door when I'm there. It doesn't matter. There's nowhere in the law that the tenants have to be respectful. But the N12, under very strong consequences, cost consequences if it's served in bad faith. And we're going to talk about that because tenants have recourse. Remember, I told you guys that tenants are a lot more savvy nowadays than ever before. And more so nowadays than even last year. We're noticing a lot of the bad faith applications that are ending up in our office. They're not only listing the landlord, they're listing a listing agent, they're listing a broker, and even the brokerages. Because it's a lot easier for a tenant to let off people out of a litigation claim than it is to add people on halfway. And remember, I said, guys, you're not insured, so guess what? If you're found that you interfered in the process and you're fined, you're digging into your pocket, which is what we're trying to avoid. Requirement number 2, compensation. Compensation equivalent to 1 month's rent in accordance to section 48(1) or 49(1) of the Residential Tenancies Act must be paid to the tenant. Okay, here's the kicker. Whether or not the tenant moves out. Okay, hold that thought, we're gonna come back to it. Remember, compensation must be paid, it is a requirement. What happens to your agreement of purchase and sale if you don't meet your financing condition? If you don't waive it, what happens? Your offer becomes null and void, and it's no good anymore. No different than this. But a lot of agents don't know the requirements. And I'll tell you, right now, we have a very I'm gonna say a very scary situation that we have, one of our landowners at the fire. Where the property is sold from over $1 million. The tenant is not leaving. The landlord has served an N12. The buyer has sold his property and is living in his vehicle and showering at a Tim Hortons. And working for my team had that hearing yesterday. The tenant makes 6 figures and he's taking a position that he's not leaving. So that's what's happening. That's what we see on our end. So be very, very careful. Declaration, requirement number 3, a declaration signed by the person who's going to be moving in must be signed. The landlord and tenant board will not allow for an N12 to be filed if a declaration is not filed as well. It's not enough to just have the buyer sign a declaration. No. Buyer must attend hearing period. Must. Somebody has to be at the hearing to testify to the declaration, to the validity of the declaration. Let's talk about the test to that thing. Because there's actual tests. Section 57 of the Residential Tenancies Act speaks to that thing. Because a lot of the times landlords ask me, well, how does a tenant know? What if I leave it vacant? What if I stage it? What if I install timers? What if I bring in my lawn furniture and make it look like it's my family? We've heard crazy stories. It doesn't matter if an N12 is filled out for it. Once it's served, if the tenant acts on that N12, and if they come back and the landlord doesn't do what they said they're going to do, you have a bad faith application. Here is the test to bad faith. So number 1, at the board will ask you, did the tenant rely on the N12 in order to make the move? Number 2, is there an advertisement of the rental property? I mean, we all have phones, we all have apps that we can access, we all have a friend in the real estate game, so we know that somebody can get us a listing, whether it's a MLS listing for lease or for sale. But here's the trigger question. Did the person who was supposed to move in actually move in? Did the buyer actually move in, or did they renovate and relist the property? Did they flip it? Did they re-rent it? Did the landlord's child actually move in, or did the landlord re-rent it for $1,500 more? In fact, a physical N12 is no longer required. If I have a conversation with Katelyn, I say, Katelyn, you know, I really need you guys to move out. My daughter's going to be moving into the property. And let's say she didn't even know that an N12 existed. She said, you know what, no problem. I don't want to interfere. We're moving in 60 days. And she leaves, and I said, ha, no N12 was served. Now I'm going to rent it out for $1,500 more. And she sees the ad, and she's incurred costs. She had to move her family and her kids, and she had to cough up first and last somewhere else. If it was anyone here, you'd be pretty pissed. So she's going to talk to a paralegal, and the paralegal is going to say, well, go after the landlord. What have you lost? Well, I've lost my rent. Now I'm paying $1,000 more. I live in Barrie now, where I used to live in Aurora, so I'm 45 minutes out now. Tenants have recourse. Let's talk about the recourse. The remedies that tenants can pursue on a bad faith allegation. They can claim a rent abatement. They can claim a rent differential. So what the difference in rent from what they were paying to what they are paying now times 12 months. They can claim the full rent that they lost. If she was paying $2,200 to me and she has to go pay $3,500 to somebody else, she has lost that rent. So $2,200 times 12 months. Moving costs, storage fees. She can request that the board issue an order for us to pay a fine. Or she can even ask if a realtor was involved for the board to fine the realtor. And this is where you guys will get dinged. So I mentioned that, once a compensation is paid, it must be paid before the termination date. And then I mentioned whether or not the tenant moves out. So show of hands, who's read the N12? Okay, good. That is it, right? Okay, so many people don't read the N12, okay? And I'll tell you, oftentimes agents call me and they'll say, well, if the tenant doesn't move out, we'll sue them. It's great. They don't want any assets, not working. So what are you suing them for? On top of that, you can't sue someone if you put them on notice. So what are you suing them for? On top of that, on the N12, the second page of the N12, it tells the tenant, the third bolded box from the left down. Tenant, what if you disagree with the notice? For whatever reason, lost your job, you're a single mother, you want your kids to finish the school year in the same school, your daughter is traumatized, she can't walk to school, she needs a special school bus, or whatever the case is. You do not have to move out. It tells the tenants you do not have to move out if you disagree with this notice. So landlord, what are you gonna sue the tenant for? How are you gonna sue the tenant? There's a difference between a notice and an agreement. And we're gonna talk about that. More specifically, the tenant and the buyer owe nothing to one another. There's no duty of care over each other. The only party who owes a duty of care to the tenant and a duty of care to the buyer is who? The seller landlord. There's nowhere in the Residential Tenancies Act that says upon the sale of the property, tenant must move out. Won't find it. There's nowhere in the Ontario Standard Lease that says upon signing this lease agreement, if the landlord sells the property, the tenant agrees to move out. It doesn't exist. You see, you're not owed anything. Your seller landlord isn't owed anything. The tenant isn't owed anything. There are only two things they're owed: a right to be heard and a right to a fair hearing. That's it. Only the landlord and tenant can terminate the tenancy and issue a written eviction. I had a realtor last week who served an N12, and the tenant didn't move out on August 31st. So what did he do? So the realtor, the landlord, and the landlord's son waited for the tenant to leave, and they went into the basement apartment. They packed up the tenant's stuff and belongings. In less than an hour, they put everything on the lawn. The tenant was able to file a stay with the landlord and tenant board for a legal lockout, and was in the property on Monday. Yes, the truth is getting fine. So the landlord and tenant board really acts for the legal lockout. Quickly, very quickly. Let's talk about service. So one thing I really love about the real estate industry is that the industry has really evolved with technology. So back in 2004, 2005, when I was, we were all glued toward fax machine. The veteran agents, fax, they know, right? Everything was sent and received via fax. Nowadays, you're using your smartphones. You're using e-signature tools and your fingers to sign offers. It's fantastic. You don't even have to be in the same country or in the same room as your spouse or your realtor to sign. It's great. However, the wheels of justice spin very slowly, and landlords must serve their tenants in accordance with the rules of procedure in the following ways. Number one, by handing the document to the tenant, handing it to another adult rental unit, sliding it or placing it in a mailbox where mail is usually delivered via fax, via mail. However, remember, the requirements shift depending on which method of service you use. If mail is being used as a method of service, your 60-day notice is no longer a 60-day notice, because you have to leave work for service. And if you miss that, and you go to the landlord and tenant board, and you have a buyer that's sleeping in his car and showering at its importance, the board says, I'm sorry, Realtor Katelyn, you didn't follow the proper procedure. What happens? The matter gets tossed. Oh, but it's only one day. It doesn't matter, didn't follow proper procedure. Well, my client paid $2 million for his property, doesn't matter, didn't follow procedure. But the buyer's living in his car, doesn't matter, didn't follow proper procedure. So we spoke about the N12. Now we can hear a video. We spoke about the N12. What happens, because not always does a landlord or a new purchaser want to occupy. Sometimes, very few, but sometimes a new purchaser assumes a tenant. They want to assume the tenant. So what happens in that case? And oftentimes, realtors are giving the wrong information to their buyers. They're saying, hey, buyer, don't worry, the rent is low. Don't worry, you can increase it. Yes, you can increase it, but there are rules related to how you can increase it. So I'll start off this slide by saying the only thing that changes when a seller landlord, when the buyer is becoming the seller landlord, is where the rent is sent to and to whom it's payable to. Because covenants that run with the land, in accordance to Section 18 of the Residential Tenancies Act, continue as they are when a property changes title. So what does that mean? If the rent is $900 and tomorrow's closing day, the day after tomorrow, the rent will still be $900. If I have 2 parking spots and I'm not paying for a parking fee, guess what? My tenancy continues exactly the way it was before this buyer becomes a new landlord. Nothing changes. Landlord, if you want to change the rent, you can do so, but you have to follow the rules. A tenant is not obligated to sign a new lease. In fact, the only party who benefits from renewing and re-signing a new lease is who? The tenant. Because that means that that tenant is guaranteed housing for X amount of time. So landlord, if your situation changes, if you need to move into the property, if you sold the property and the buyer moves in, you must honor that existing lease. Period. Let's talk about buyer agents. A lot of buyer agents, right? So buyer agents, I would say when you're selling a tenanted property, there's a little bit more work for you to do than for the listing side. And here are the 3 things that all buyer agents need to include in Schedule A. Number 1, a copy of the existing lease. Whether it's an Ontario standard lease, whether it's Form 400, whether it's something written on a napkin, if something in writing exists, you want a copy. The reason why you want a copy is because the last thing you want is for your deal to close, your client to be the landlord for a little while, and then call you later on and say, hey, Realtor Kate, you didn't provide me with the lease. Can I get the lease? Hey, Realtor Kate, you didn't provide me with this. Can I get this? But if you ask for it up front, you're eliminating all those calls. Number 2, a tenant acknowledgement. Who's heard of a tenant acknowledgement? Okay. I'll tell you where to get one, but I'll explain to you what it is, and it's very, very important. You see, we all know that some tenancies are long-term tenancies. We all know that things can change over time. People get old, people die, people get married, people have children, people get divorced, people get remarried. People bring in their parents from overseas. A tenant acknowledgement is confirmation of the lease terms from the prospective tenant as of today. Who are the tenants residing in the rental unit as of today? Who are the occupants as of today? What is the rent as of today? When was the last rent increase date? Are there, who's paying for utilities? How many parking spots do you have? So why is this important? Especially during a sale. So I had a client who purchased a 2-acre lot in King City. And silencing, it was a beat down bungalow, he didn't need to see it, he was gonna tear it down and build a single family home. He closed on the property, he called us, he said, I have all my permits in place, I'm ready to serve a notice, so I'm gonna engage your team to serve notice. And I said, great, the seller was a realtor. There was no tenant acknowledgement. The seller had disclosed that there was only one tenant paying the rent, that's it. So what did we do? Had our permits in place, we served our notice to that one tenant. We waited 8 months to get to the landlord and tenant board. The tenant attended with their legal rep. The legal rep raises a preliminary and says, Ms. Di Lisi, you're missing a tenant. And I said, no, we're not, because we dotted our I's, we crossed our T's, then we have the direction information from the real estate closing lawyers. We have everything to go. And they said, well, no, because the wife of the tenant, even though she's not paying the rent, she's paying the utility bills. They were able to provide us with 12 months of paid utility bills in the name of the wife. That's what happened. Guess whose client was placed? Because the client didn't know. Now, had there been a tenant acknowledgement, we would have known exactly how many tenants were occupied. Real scary. And number 3, the seller to sign a written direction to the tenant as of such and such date. Your landlord will be Katelyn. Please forward your rent to her via email. This is her email, and here's her address of service. Now, closing day is very exciting. Agents are closing, buyers are picking up the keys, and the tenants are like kids. I'm gonna forget them. And nobody notifies them. So what happens is, when the rent is due, the buyer goes and he knocks on the tenant's door and says, I'm the new buyer, give me my rent. And the tenant says, hold on a second, I don't know who you are. I don't have anything from anyone that you're the new buyer. I'm not just gonna fork over my rent to you. And then they stop paying the rent. Not a good way to start a tenancy relationship, right? So these 3, ask for these. I'll tell you where to get a tenant acknowledgement closer to the end of the presentation. Now let's talk about clauses. So I've mentioned in the agreement of purchase and sale, buyers need to make their intentions very clear. Very clear. What is the buyer's intent? Buyer, are you moving in? Your family moving in? Are you assuming a tenant? What's the deal? What do you want to do with the property? This clause is the only clause that we dive off of in order to serve an N12. An N12 notice, in other words, should never, ever be served without direction from the buyer. Ever. And before we're engaged, we always look over the agreement of purchase and sale, and if this clause is not in there, we ask that it be inserted. The offer be amended and it be inserted. So this clause basically states that the buyer authorizes the seller, when this offer becomes unconditional, to serve the N12 notice, because the buyer or their family member require possession of the property. It further goes on to say that the buyer and seller agree that in the event the tenant does not pay, the parties agree to either extend the closing an additional 90 to 120 days, or the buyer to assume the existing tenants without any penalty to the seller. But that's not even the most important part of this clause. Here is the most important part of this clause. Last sentence. The buyer agrees to provide the seller with a written indemnity on completion, indemnifying the seller from all actions, causes of action, claims, and demands of any kind whatsoever that may occur in the event that the buyer does not take possession of and occupy the property. So we all know, we work with buyers. Buyers are liars. We know that, right? Not always they tell you the truth. Even our clients, not all the time they tell us the truth. But why else would we serve an N12 have this clause not be inserted in the agreement of purchase and sale? This can even save you guys Because the buyer would have disclosed to the buyer agent, the buyer agent, no, I need to move in. I'm selling my house, so I need to move in. Without this clause, at the landlord and tenant board, if an N12 is served, it's a Hail Mary. It's, you have to prove that at the time the N12 was served, it was served because the buyer required possession. And I'll tell you, so many times this clause is not in there. We're engaged we're engaged closer to the closing date, and the agents just had a conversation with one another, and the listing agent says, well, the buyer agent just told me that they wanted the property for themselves. Is there anything in writing? No. Is there anything in text message? No. Do you remember the date of the conversation? No. Did you follow up with an email? No. Let's move on.
Any questions?
Okay. So what's the alternative? So I mentioned, it's gonna take 7 to 8 months to get to the landlord and tenant board. It's like playing a game of Russian roulette at the landlord and tenant board. You don't know what the board is going to decide because the law is the law, but the person deciding can trump the law. The board has the ultimate power. So what's the alternative? The alternative is cash for keys. Let's talk about cash for keys. Cash for keys is not extortion. Let's start off with that. Not extortion. Cash for keys is a legal and mutual agreement to end the tenancy. Parties are agreeing to end the tenancy. Why is it not extortion? Because it's not the landlord's only option. I agree, sometimes it is the only option. But really, it's not, because the landlord can pursue an eviction through the landlord and tenant board if they have cause to do so. Cash for keys should be facilitated by a legal representative who's well-versed, equipped with the law and the strategy, because it really is a strategy. No offense to real estate lawyers or any other lawyers out there, but you don't really know the law or the strategy, and we have to play between the lines. That legal representative will reach out to the tenant to bring the tenant and landlord together, so there's some sort of a meeting of the minds. And if they can agree to something, and it doesn't always have to be cash. Sometimes it's cash, sometimes landlords agree to waive the rental arrears, sometimes they just want to pay for moving costs, sometimes they want to pay storage fees or whatever the case is. It's a strategy. Not always cash. Physical cash, at least. That legal representative will bring the parties together by drafting terms of settlement, kind of like the rules of the game. Who holds the funds? When are funds exchanged? When are keys provided? What condition is the property going to be left in? And most importantly, can the parties come after one another later on? Remember, tenants have 12 months from the date that they move out to pursue a claim through the landlord and tenant board. Any claim. The place had mold and now I have respiratory issues. I was living in the property. I didn't have a working dishwasher. I won $50 rent abatement times 12 months because I wasn't able to use the dishwasher. Whatever the case is. The most important part of a cash for keys is the full and final mutual advice, because it basically says the parties agree to walk away with clear tenants. Now, guys, once these settlement terms and the N11 are signed, remember, they're married to one another. Once they're signed, they're filed with the landlord and tenant board. Once they're filed with the board will then issue an ex parte order, which is just a fancy legal term for an eviction order without a hearing. You see, the N12 route is going to cost you time, and you still don't know what's going to happen. The cash for keys route is going to cost you money, but you have an influence on the outcome. Now, I'll tell you, as agents, it's not just getting an N11 signed. You need terms of settlement. And terms of settlement, it's not a downloadable document that you can just print off the internet. It's not, because all tenancies and the issues between the parties are different. So I had an agent, Let me tell you this story. So I had an agent, very well-known agent. And he had access to me all the time, so I'm not quite sure why he didn't call or message me. He called me one day and he said, "Hey, Vida, I just want to let you know, I am sitting in my nice Mercedes in front of the rental unit and I did my job for you. Let's call him Frank." I said, "Okay, Frank, what did you do?" And he said, "I got the N11 signed. And I went one step further. I gave the tenants $15,000 certified check." And then I started sweating. Without talking to me? And he goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Okay, well, don't leave. Send me the N11, let me have a look at it." What does he do? Takes a photo of the N11, sends it over to me. And I said, "Frank, this is great. It's such a great job." He said, "I know." I said, "But I see here that there are two parties listed on the first page. There's a husband and wife. But on the second page, there's only one signature." And it was quiet for me. He goes, "Yeah, because there's only space for one signature." The number, Frank, you have to go back and get the second signature. "No problem. I haven't left yet." It's out of his Mercedes. "I will let you know. I will confirm with you in the next 5 minutes when the wife signs." I already know what's gonna go down. So he goes to the door, he goes to the basement, probably knocks on the door, husband comes out, and the husband says, "Can I help you?" Frank says, "Yes, I gave you $15,000, you signed, but I need your wife to sign." The husband looks at the sign and goes, "Oh, yeah, it's gonna cost you $15,000. So what did we learn? Don't be Frank. Here. Do not engage in. It's not just signing at 11, it's a process. Now, not only did Frank have to pay $30,000 for his signature, for 2 signatures, but the tenant moved out and brought a claim of $35,000 thereafter because there was no settlement terms. Now, Frank was smart enough to have his clients engage us, but still, there was bad faith there. So we are coming close to the end of the presentation. Like I said, we provide legal support to landlords and investors and your clients. They can go right onto our website and schedule a free discovery call or a free consultation right off of the website. Likely it won't be myself that is making the calls, likely my husband Robert who's going to be making the calls, but they can actually book a dedicated date and time for a strategy plan. There we go. Okay, we're almost at the end of the presentation. I asked if you guys can, I'll tell you where to get a copy of the tenant acknowledgement. If you haven't done so, head over to landlordmastery.ca. I don't sell anything. I'm always giving away my materials, my presentations, everything is absolutely free. Head over to landlordmastery.ca. You can download your free copy of the Landlord Mastery Guide. This guide gives you access to our Google Drive where you can download scripts, forms, a legal notice for entry, the tenant acknowledgement that you can have your seller clients fill out and attach as a schedule to the firm agreement of purchase and sale. Lots of great resources on the Landlord Mastery site. And here we are at the end of the presentation. I know it was an overwhelming amount of information. I would love to open the floor up for a Q&A.
What do you want to ask, Ray?
My question. It's so
So there's our broker.
Nice to meet you.
He's one that gets all these fun legal cases.
He doesn't know that yet.
Right.
So, you mentioned if the unit has 4 or more units, landlord could still, apply to live there.
So if the property contains 4 or more units, an N12 can be served for landlords owners.
Yeah.
For
What
the
if
whole
the
thing.
property is owned by a corporation?
No, remember we talked about that? No. if the landlord or the new purchaser is a corporation, because corporations are separate legal entities, they can't get married, they don't have children, they can't personally occupy. Now, let me just piggyback off your question. That's a good question. So, yesterday, I had a landlord call into one of my team members and said, I own a property. It was owned by a holding company. The tenant was a good tenant, but I need the property for myself. So what did he do? He went and he changed title and from the corporation to himself personally so that he can serve an N12. Okay, these type of matters, because remember, you're using the N12 as a loophole, it's not going to fly with the board. Always has to be served. Cash for keys. You're gonna learn very quickly that cash for keys is the answer to
Can I ask you a question? What's wrong with that scenario that you've just put forward? Why is that not good faith if the owner wants to move in?
So the property was owned by a corporation.
Yeah.
Okay, the landlord is a director of the corporation. Okay, the corporation cannot personally occupy. So what the landlord did is he went and he changed the name, transferred the name from the corporation to himself personally.
Well, why is that not good?
Because that was the reason, the only way to get that tenant out was to serve an N12.
Yeah, but
He
he
had no
wanted,
other cost.
if he wanted to move in, is that not genuine that he wants to move in?
Well, it's genuine that he wants to move in, but the act of changing the title
Just
is
not.
not good. Because what it does, it shows the board, landlord, you had no other choice but to change the name in order to be able to evict it.
Yeah, but he wants to move in, so
That's right, so he has to find cause to move in. And he wasn't able, there was no cause. Tenant was paying the rent, in full and on time, he was respecting the property, he was taking care of the property. So what's the other way to evict them? I'm gonna go change title and I will serve it as well.
How soon can that be done? Like within a month or so, right? For the eviction?
How long does it take?
Can they
To evict?
Yeah. No, to change that title from
Well, you can change title, I would say, give it about a year or so.
a year.
Because enough time would have passed that certain things would have unfolded, maybe the tenant was on bound, but by changing title today and serving N12 next week, it shows.
Bad faith, right?
Isn't there an additional question due to the indisposition as well?
I'm sorry?
The indisposition, when you switch from a corporation to an individual. So there are gonna be other costs that you're gonna incur as well, right? So the capital gains, unless there's a loss from acquisition to that time, that's also another consideration as well.
But that's separate from.
That's what I'm saying, in order to do that strategy,
That's
it's more
correct.
like he's not worth.
But there was a lot more behind, like, I'll give you just the reason why the landlord purchased this property in the corporation is because he was residing in, Toronto community housing. And you cannot own assets and reside in Toronto community. You can. Well, all of that, but I can tell you that certain.
Wow.
I have a question. And correct me, in one of the slides you said, on the regular APS, if someone is selling a property, they assume that vacant occupancy is the default. My question is, what's the statutory limitation? So assuming I acquired property 2.5 years ago, didn't know that, I'm on the buyer side, and tenants were inherited. What is the time frame I can now go back to that seller and saying, hey, regardless, because that's my entitlement, what's the statutory limitation?
You have to talk to a real estate lawyer, because that's not a landlord and tenant issue. That becomes a contract issue, right? So you have to go and talk to a real estate lawyer. I believe it's 2 years.
2 years?
I believe so. But that's now a contract law issue, total contract law, totally separate. You have to go back and sue the seller.
Thank
Is there any circumstance, I know some buyers will buy a property, want to have it rented, and want a finite ending to that potential, let's say, like in 2 years' time, or 4 years' time. It sounds like there's no way to operate something like that. And if the tenant comes into a situation like that, in spite of the fact that at the time they might agree to it, even if it runs outside of it's still a binding contract.
Correct, correct. So are you married? Oh. So.
Not anymore.
Totally off. Anyway, it's like a marriage. Once you sign the marriage contract with the tenant, it's a release agreement. You can't end a tenancy. You can't sign a divorce paper at the time that you're signing the marriage agreement, right? In the N11, it actually says an N11 cannot be signed at the same time that a lease agreement is,
Very common.
right? It's also in the Ontario Standard Lease. Remember, anytime a landlord rents a property for rental income, they take on a risk. What are these risks? Non-payment of rent. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Late payments. They might have to pay cash for fees, right? They might have to go through a broken system to get the tenant out. But these are all risks, and they have to have cause.
So again, just in spite of knowing in advance with your prospective tenant,
Zero.
there's no workaround.
Nothing. Even if you put a clause in the Ontario Standard Lease, somebody asked me the other day, if we insert a clause in the Ontario Standard Lease, if the tenant agrees to vacate in 1 year from the date of this agreement, how can you enforce that? Remember, you need an order from the landlord and tenant board to enforce an eviction. And any clause that you put in a lease agreement, even if both parties agree, any clause that's contrary to the residential tenants is clauses like the parties agree that the tenants will not have any pets. The parties agree that the tenant will be the only person residing in the property. There will be no overnight visitors.
Wow.
Smoking. Actually, let me talk about smoking. Smoking, in the Ontario Standard Lease, there's a section where you can put properties, no smoking, or there are smoking rules. However, let's say, for example, I have a medical condition and I need my marijuana to control my condition. You come to me and you say, well, you agree that you're not gonna smoke. This is not recreational smoking. This is to control my medical condition. A landlord will open themselves up to a human rights complaint if you engage a tenant and say, well, you're not supposed to be smoking. Same as you're not supposed to have a pet. That's the exception. If the condo bylaw says no pets, then no pets. In fact, for those of you who do condo leases, you should always get a copy of the smoking rules, the bylaws related to noise and pets, and have the other side initial. Because if they move in and if they have a little puppy and then you receive a letter from the condo council, and the condo council says, well, here's the copy of the bylaws and your tenant is not supposed to have any pets. Get rid of your tenant. You can't just get rid of the tenant because you, landlord, didn't do your due diligence. So now it's going to cost you. Answer your question?
No, because you mentioned about effects, strictly no pets in the document that you mentioned. And a lot of people have dogs. I mean, I love dogs, so it's okay. But when I asked them, how do you keep it? Service animal.
Okay, so we got a question. So somebody said, can you reject a tenant because they have a service animal? You should always get the definition of what the condo bylaw, how they define a service. Now, an emotional animal is not a service animal. A service animal is for someone who is visually impaired. Someone who has a white stick. That is a service animal. Service animals are not animals that you can approach and pet. They are working, they're like people, right? And they come with paperwork. So if you're dealing with that type of scenario, always get the condo corporation's rules and definitions about how they define service. Yes, and I'm gonna answer the second part of this question. How can you decline service animal clients? I can't give legal advice, okay, but I can tell you that if you are declining an application solely because of that service animal, you are opening up yourselves to risk. Period. That's what we do. If they're maybe, but if you're going to decline someone, you decline them because they don't qualify. Why do we not work with buyers? Because they don't qualify. You want to work with qualified people. Right? You don't work with a buyer, you don't not work with a buyer because they have 5 kids. You don't care how many kids they have. So what does it matter if the tenant has a service animal? If it's a legit service animal and a landlord rejects them, have that in writing, it's a huge human rights.
Is it just enough to receive an email instead of N11 from tenant to entering tenancy?
So here's the, let's talk about N11s. An N11 is an agreement to act. It's an agreement to vacate. If the tenant doesn't vacate, the landlord has to file that N11 with the landlord and tenant board for an eviction. An N11 on its own, it means nothing. It's as good as 12. Okay, it needs to be filed with the board for order. However, tenants have 10 days from the date that the board issued that order to file a motion. And a motion is basically asking the courts to do something. So I'm gonna file a motion to put a hold or stay on that eviction. And if the board agrees and grants that request, they will put a hold or stay on the eviction. Then they will hold a hearing 2 months thereafter, and the tenant will advocate their position and hopefully convince the board that they be allowed to continue the tenancy. Now, in place of the 11, let's say you have an email. An email needs to include the elements of an email. What are the elements? The parties' names, the address, the mutual agreed upon date of time, right? It needs to be acknowledged by the recipient. Then if that email is filed with the landlord tenant board, it's not a guarantee that the board will issue that order. Because remember, it's not a formal notice. So to be safe, right, when you're getting an email, why not get them to sign the actual document?
The reason is I have a client that he received an email from his tenant that they are going to vacate their home at a certain time, but the tenant is not signing the tenant. He's just saying that I send you that email. Why should I sign it?
Right, so that's going to be a tricky one. That's going to be up to the landlord and tenant board. Oftentimes, tenants are not savvy. Landlords are barely savvy. They don't take under the certain elements that are required. Right, they say, hi landlord, as of this day, I'm no longer going to be living here. Fine. Well, who's the landlord? Where's the property? What's my name? What date? Right? There's no pull. So it's not likely that the board will issue that eviction, which is what you want, because in an email, even on the last day, the tenant can call you and say, I'm not moving from this. So email, not very strong.
Going back on the pets, now if I were to rent my house and I have in the agreement, because we spoke about the counterpart, but what happens if I have in the agreement that no pets and then they show up with a pet a month after?
Nothing to do.
Nothing you could do, right? That's what-
Even if they agree at the time of the lease is signed,
Yeah.
that's.
Let's give the example of Frank, that wife did sign and they demanded $15,000 more. And how about they have also the kid is living there? So need their signature as well.
So only tenants. Remember, there's a difference between tenants and occupants, guests, visitors, and roommates. Let me explain. Tenants do not need the landlord's permission to have other guests, occupants, roommates living in the rental property. They don't need the landlord's permission for that.
Or even a
The
room.
only time that a landlord's permission is required is if I said, landlord Katelyn, can Bobby move in and be on the lease? Can you add him to the lease? then the landlord can say, well, I need to see his paperwork. And then she can make a decision. But if Bobby moves in and he pays me rent, I'm paying rent to the landlord, there's nothing that the landlord.
I have a question regarding rent increase. If the landlord and the tenant mutually agree to the rent over and above the guideline, is it against the law to do it?
So I'll tell you what the law says. The law says that a landlord can increase the rent with respect to the rules related to rent increase. Now, if the parties agree to an increase above what the board allows, tenants have 1 year from the date of the last payment to bring an application for a refund. The difference.
1 year.
However, per the new bill 184 that was that came into effect September 2021, illegal rent increases are deemed void if they have been paid for 12 consecutive months. Okay? Remember, if the illegal rent increase has been paid for 12 consecutive months, then it becomes part of the lawful rent. But the tenant has until the last day of the 12th rental period to file an application. We had a tenant file against our landlord on day 363. So don't do it.
What's the fine?
I have a question.
So the fine for I'm gonna come back to it. The fine for illegal rent increase is basically you have to return the increase and likely the application. That's it.
Where do we take the paralegal course?
Oh.
I think that's a full like college program, no?
It
University
is.
program.
It sure is. Yeah.
He is giving up his real life.
I have a question.
We can normally use paralegal.
They don't need permission to have occupants or visitors or whatever. No. What if the landlord wants a certain number of people in their unit and then they say that's the number of people we have and then they bring in extra people?
So it doesn't really matter what the landlord wants. What matters is what the law allows. Now, there are exceptions, right? You can't have 10 people living in a 1-bedroom condo, right? Now, but in order for the landlord to obtain an eviction, they have to serve notice, find the section of the appropriate bylaw that says per 10 people, this is the square footage for a living square footage for 10 people. They have to file with the board. They have to wait 7 to 8 months to receive a notice of hearing. Hopefully, they're heard at the board. On that specific conduct-based notice, the board doesn't issue an eviction. Remember, the board's mandate is to protect against evictions and unlawful rent increases. So what the board is going to do likely is they're going to issue an order for compliance. Tenant, you must reduce the number of people to 3 or less, whatever they feel is fit, by such and such date. That's it. It's what, and in order for a landlord to be able to enforce it, they have to go through the board.
You have to get pictures of like the tenant.
Well,
How do you prove
see, this type of scenario becomes really hard because firstly, you have to prove that somebody's living there. You're not just visiting. You can't go through someone's mail and take pictures because it's against the law, right? You can't open somebody's mail because it's against the law. You can't install cameras inside the rental unit because it's unnecessary surveillance. So you have to actually prove that they're living there.
Do you anticipate, I know there's often a lot of talk about.
Oh boy, we're gonna come back for a whole day for that. Let me talk about the landlord, okay? Because a lot of the times people say, well, why is the board so tenant friendly? And I'll tell you, I'm a landlord myself. I know exactly how the board operates. I've had issues with my own tenants, everybody, and you're dealing with people at the end of the day. The problem is not the board being tenant. Okay, that's not the problem. The law doesn't say we favor the tenant over the rent. The law doesn't say tenant don't pay your rent, destroy the property, bring in 50 dogs. The law doesn't say that. The law provides a balance. Here's the problem. 5 years ago, if you were to come to me and you were to say, you know, Katelyn's not paying her rent, get her out. We'd serve her notice, file with the board, we'd be in front of the board in day 60, we'd obtain the order in day 90, she'd be out in day 120. Minimal losses to the landlord. Here's where the system is broken. Now, if you come to me and say she's not paying rent, you would serve notice, file with the board, 7 to 8 months, receive a notice of hearing, yay. Are we guaranteed a hearing? No. Anything can happen at the board. We log into our hearing because everything is online now. Hopefully the adjudicator didn't forget to attend because that happens. Hopefully there's no technical difficulties because that happens. Hopefully there's no scheduling overload because the board often schedules 100 matters in a 3-hour block to be heard. And if your matter's not heard, sorry landlord, you have to wait until it's rescheduled. That makes you then a victim of a broken system. It's not that the law tells her don't pay your rent. No, the law doesn't tell her that. The law or the process is what's broken. And the province has injected about $6 million into the tribunal system. But what happens when you hire adjudicators? What happens when you hire a new employee? You gotta train them, right? Somebody's gotta watch them, you gotta train them, you gotta make sure they follow the rules, they follow the steps. And that's what is time consuming. So even to today, 4 years after COVID, we are still feeling the ripple effects. Sure, it's not 7 to 8 months delay at the board, it's now 6. Is it going to get better? I don't know.
I know you said it's unbiased between tenant and landlord. But dealing from a personal standpoint, they always assume the landlord is in a position of strength. And the burden of proof is on the landlord to prove that what the tenant is saying, even if they're at fault, is actually true. And then they have timelines and then they can appeal on everything. My humble opinion, which also ties into affordable housing, but enough affordable housing is not around, so therefore a way in which to mitigate their risk until they build more affordable housing, if they do, is to control the evictions on private residential, be it commercial or residential. That is not mentioned, but I'm speaking from personal, and I deal with clients' estates as well, that the problem is not just between the landlord and the tenant. It's as if your property is being controlled by the system in addition to the landlord and tenancy board and the residential housing unit as well.
And everybody remember that in October, November, when it's time to vote.
Yeah,
I think
that's.
somebody here had.
Yeah, I do have a question. This in regards to N11, right? On what ground does a tenant has to request to put a hold?
It really, so on what grounds, let me answer 2 questions.
Oh,
On what grounds does the tenant have to sign an N11? They don't have to sign an N11, they don't have to agree to. On what grounds do they have to put a hold or stay on the eviction, correct?
yeah,
After an N11 is signed.
right.
This is going to be up to the landlord and tenant board, whoever receives that motion request to stay with you. So let me give you an example. We've had evictions, motions granted. Tenants filing motions to stay evictions because they've had the flu. I know, the board grants this, it boggles our mind. Then we've had evictions where the tenant's son has been shot. And she's distraught and she can't do it. So it goes from not really a good enough reason to maybe it's. It really depends on who receives that request at the landlord. Remember, you're dealing with the social justice system.
Yep.
A system where they see a landlord as someone with deep pockets. You can afford property, lucky you. You have more than one property, lucky you. It's a dream for people to own. Right? They don't see, landlords purchase properties for different reasons than tenants. Tenants rent for housing, for shelter. Landlords buy for us.
So to pay the bills.
Right.
Okay, go back to the 10 people in one living spot area. This might be a little bit outside, but wouldn't that be like a fire code or some?
It could be,
And then you can call,
it could be.
they'll call them and get them out that way. Maybe not.
Fire department doesn't have the right to evict. Remember, when someone goes to a property and they knock on the door and say, hey, you get out, that's eviction. You need an order from the court to evict. So the fire department can come in and say, well, yeah, you're right, there's time to live here. Landlord, you need fire rated doors, you need proper means of egress, you need a smoke detector, and oh, here's your order from the fire department. You have 30 days to comply.
I just wanna see what the reaction is.
I know,
Yeah,
it's, and I'm telling you because we deal with this.
Yeah.
Right, a few years ago, there was someone in the news, one of our landlords was a victim to this person who had rented out luxury homes in and they boarded up the rooms and they were renting in plywood. And he was driving with his Ferrari, I don't know if you remember. He was driving to these rental properties to collect rent from these tenants in his Ferrari. And these poor landlords, they had their homes, their properties destroyed. But if the fire department gets involved, they don't say, hey, tenant number 1, tenant number 2, get out. They say, landlord, you need to fix. Here's an order. And it's going to cost you a lot more time to go through the board to get the occupants or whatever they're gonna call me, your tenants to comply than it will be for you to go and fix what needs to be fixed.
What can we legally ask on for during the application or not ask, which is not legal, of a tenant during the application process?
So remember, things like when you're vetting a tenant, and I have to come back for this, we have a third presentation for vetting tenants. When you're vetting a tenant, things like they're a valid issue government. No. Why do you need to see what they look like? Are you going to judge them on the color of their skin? The fact that they wear a headscarf? What are you judging them on? If they have the income, if they have the credit, what does it matter if they're green?
Okay,
You have
well,
to be very, very careful. Now, I know you have FinTrack requirements that allow you to ask for their ID and jot down their number. But as a landlord, you have to be really, really careful when you're asking someone for their ID.
well, if the other agent wants this information in order to,
Not what the agent wants.
they always ask for it.
Ask for
But
it.
if you don't provide it, then they're not gonna be chosen.
Yeah, right. So here's what's been happening on our end, because that's common practice for me. Firstly, it's not what the other agent wants. What is oftentimes what the client is asking. If that agent is, if you, for example, say to the other agent, well, you know, I can't give you the ID. Are you gonna accept the application based on what I provided you? What does it matter what they look like? If my clients don't get accepted, I need a reason in writing as to why they didn't get accepted.
Did they have to provide that?
Absolutely. If you go to the Human Rights Tribunal and you file a claim and you say, my clients make 6 figures, good income, they have good credit, they're both professionals, they're people of color. We provided the other side with ID, and we are wondering why they weren't accepted. That the Human Rights Tribunal will hold a hearing, and they will issue an order for the landlord to disclose why they rejected that application. And that landlord better tread very lightly, because if it's an issue with color, it's an issue with race, or any of the 17 code grounds, they're opening up themselves to a human rights.
You mentioned the question earlier about the 12 for properties that have more than 3 units, 4 units that the owner could get, and then 12. Now, is that for to vacate one of the units or all 4?
No. One, yeah.
That's what I wanted.
I mean, unless you have, so we've had a landlord say, I want, we're gonna move into, they bought a 4-plex. We're gonna be moving into apartment 1. We want our daughter in apartment 2, our son in apartment 3, and my parents in apartment. Then you can serve. But then it's gonna raise an eyebrow at the board, so. Right?
Sorry, I just have a question. So, if it's a corporation and you're just dealing with the agent, and the agent is not providing any information for the landlord. So is it a board issue or you have to go to the lawyer?
So are you talking about in terms of a rental app or in terms of a?
Rental. Rental.
Okay, so.
The application.
The tenant is,
So the tenant is asking for the landlord's information, but it's a corporation,
yeah,
so do they have to go?
the
to
landlord
court?
doesn't have to provide a corporation information. to it. The
Sorry?
tenant, the landlord doesn't have to provide their corporation information to a tenant.
No, I'm saying the property which is rented, it's a corporation, it's not a landlord,
Okay,
but the tenant is only dealing with the agent.
okay.
And the agent is not providing any information for the landlord.
Like contact
Alternative
information.
Contact,
Yeah.
okay, okay, so on the Ontario Standard Lease, there's a section, I believe it's section 3, that asks for contact information or the address for service to the landlord. If the landlord has hired a property management company, they can put their office address for service there. But here is a legal way for a tenant to withhold rent. If the landlord does not provide their address for service, as stated on the lease, the tenant can legally withhold 1 month rent until that address is provided to them. They don't have to provide their personal address. It could be a property management address. It could be a PO box.
It's actually property
Address?
management address.
Yeah.
But then, what if the property management is not responding? Then,
Well, they don't have to respond. There's nothing in the law that says that they have to respond. What the law requires is an address of service for the landlord to be provided. So if the property management is not responding, the tenant can file a claim, T2 application for tenants' rights through the board, and then they will meet there, and I'm sure they'll respond.
okay.
I just wanted to get your opinion on unenforceable clauses that have become common, like in the real estate industry, because you see it all the time. There's no pet clauses that are unenforceable. There's key deposits that are high as like, $1,000 I've seen. Like, I feel like sometimes I have to put this in because everyone else is kind of doing it, even though I know a lot of these are BS. So I just want like, what are your thoughts on, like, maybe there's better clauses we could put in place of a lot of the ones we've seen out there, or?
So that's a great question. In the landlord mastery guide, you can download the most updated Ontario standards, dated 2020. Even for my own rental properties, I only use the Ontario standards. I don't have any appendices. I don't have any Schedule A's or any of these clauses because all of the legit clauses are already built in. And I always say to agents, guys, don't put these in there. What for? You're wasting your time. On top of that, it makes you look a little incompetent when you're putting something in there that you can't even enforce, right? So try to stay away from that.
Here's interesting stuff. We've not in control. We represent the tenant. The landlord side is creating all these clauses. It's not no control over that, but they're not enforceable.
But the law will
Yeah.
override those, right?
Yeah, the law will override those.
So we do, so.
Yeah.
Do, I guess.
You know,
So
you're
want
not
to
just
pick a fight, want to pick a fight, you don't do it. Like, can't do anything.
Yeah.
They're not gonna give you the keys. That's really good.
I mean, if you are on the tenant side, just make sure the tenant knows, look, it's common practice, they're asking us for this, if you don't do it, you likely won't get the property. If you agree to it, it's unenforceable anyways. But if you're on the landlord side, the landlord, just use the Ontario standards. You don't need any of this. It's just laws.
I think that's just my gripe with it, because it's technically, they're illegal, they're unenforceable, but we have a culture here in Toronto real estate where I have to play along with this game because
Right.
just everyone else is doing it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for you to be able to educate every single agent. out
Same
there.
thing with ID. ID with an application, it should be outlawed, but everybody does it, so.
And you're right, everybody does do it. It's until they get bit. Then they go, well.
So how do I fight for it?
Yeah.
Just go open your mouth. and-
Well, if the tenant doesn't get accepted and they're good on paper, they're professionals, they have good income, they have good credit, you need to get the reason that you rejected. Like. First tribunal, which is one tribunal you really want to see.
It's been a long process.
Two questions there, and then, you put a clause up there which, like, there, I'm sure. Says there, the tenant, to find a place that's in big possession, that the tenant doesn't leave and extend the condition 90 days, 120 days. The clause itself doesn't say what happens after 120 days.
Yes, you're right.
So, but I'm assuming it's gonna go back to the original contract and big possession, you can't really take this, so the sellers will be a big one.
That's correct. And then it falls back on buyer. What do you want to do? Because if buyer wants to extend further, they extend further. If not, remember, no N12, then they can continue their tenancy.
Now, the other thing you put in that same clause, they're saying that, you're gonna have a deprecation from the buyer saying that they've told the truth and that you're saying it right. So that's not in the clause itself, not in the piece itself, that deprecation have to suffer in writing. not
Yes.
be in the clause.
No, indemnification, totally separate. It's done by the real estate. Totally separate.
So right now, we put under the buyer agrees, identify the sell, blah, blah, blah. So you're telling us that the lawyer, no lawyer releases.
No, it wouldn't be in a lease clause. It's not a clause that's put in the lease. It's a clause that's put in the.
Our cost is urgent indemnification.
I know, but saying it's separate, that you're talking about an additional document.
That's what
Yeah.
that's what our cost.
And the lawyer will ask for that deprecation.
But I'll tell you, not often I really does.
I would say the lawyer never did. So. Our clause should not say separate different thing to say the vote down. So,
That's it.
But as a buyer, you want that.
Absolutely. And even as a seller, you want to.
So I mean, the seller, if you're as a seller, you want that.
yeah, but the question is it a separate identification or is it in the agreement itself? You put in the agreement, we don't accept.
But this clause asks for written indemnification.
So it's upset. We have our own.
Now they're gonna call me the Percy told me.
One more question.
You read the entire.
That's right.
You can go offline.
Yeah, you can shut off the online first.
So we're here.
Shut it. So just for my people online, we'll ask, if you guys have more questions, we can here. I just wanna let our online people off. There was questions online. Are you okay? with
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you guys did have questions online, just email her because we had lots of questions in person, so I will reward you guys in person with your questions first. So you guys can email Vida online if you had any questions that weren't answered. But otherwise, we'll shut it down for now. Okay. Okay, you can end it, or do I have to end it?